Day 51, Proud Boy seditious conspiracy trial with Brandy Buckman. We're still missing Roger Parloff today. Yesterday was productive. We're very close to the end of this marathon, and they've been going hard, and away we go. Judge Kelly is on the bench. All the attorneys are present. Roger Roots is not here today, but other attorneys are. Judge says, okay, look, I want to start with this expert witness for Pizzola. He says, I'm going to preview where we are. He says, look, I'm not sympathetic to the extent the government has argued that the disclosure is late because it's being made at this hour. I'm just not sympathetic to that. The reason in part is because when I was researching case law, one of the cases is cited and the testimony could be cabined into any of this. So I'm open to hearing some of this stuff. They're talking about whether a witness was disclosed appropriately. Pretty boring stuff. Now, Kelly says that we should turn to the instruction this morning, but there's a sidebar. The husher goes on. Husher goes off. So Kelly says, all right, let's pick up where we left off on jury instructions. They're talking about the defense proposed First Amendment instructions. We haven't received any comments on it. We'll read the jury instructions when they're out. I'm not going to drag us through the discussions about the jury instructions. We'll read them when they're out and see what they say. Let's see if we get to any other testimony. They're discussing what unlawful means. It's very difficult to communicate what they're debating about because I'd rather just read it. But I can't believe they're doing jury instructions this morning. Okay. Here is the charge on seditious conspiracy. Court included language under seditious conspiracy line. Yeah, it's hard to see what they're arguing about because it's when you're talking jury instructions, it's literally what the language says word by word, and she's translating this and she's doing a great job, but we'll just read them when they're out. So they're still debating. Is this the whole day? We got the filing. Okay, now the press shows up. So they spent a lot of time hashing through jury instructions. The press shows up. And the press says, Your Honor, Emmy Parsons says, it looks like the court is entering a sealed session. And we want access to this. There's a long line of cases grounded in the idea of a right of access. And the decision to close this is limited. You shouldn't be using this. And the judge says, I acknowledge we're operating on a last-minute basis to seal this, but at the same time, I believe there are alternatives. Judge Kelly says, well, thank you for your motion. And says, I agree with you, actually. You know, the openness of proceedings are very important, but there are two different things here. There's a First Amendment basis and there's a common law basis. And there should be a history of unbroken openness on the issue. And on the issue that they are discussing here, there is not that history. Even if there were, Judge Kelly says, there must be an overriding interest to preserve higher values of a right to access. The judge says, in this case, in order to keep these proceedings sealed, Judge Kelly says, in this case, it's quite easy for me to find that the overriding interest does exist. As far as common law goes in this circuit, I have considered factors and they weigh in favor of closing the courtroom briefly. He tells the press, I'll put on the record under seal more detail regarding that and factual findings, but I've considered them and your right of access will be denied for some period of time. Defense attorneys are objecting. They say, we didn't raise these issues. and I won't put them on the record, but this court has to consider the essential values, the integrity of these judicial proceedings, the nature of these proceedings are fundamentally the highest value in any criminal prosecution, and our interest overlaps with the press. So the press and the defense are begging, open this up, let us see it. He says the public has a right to know what goes on in the courtroom, and the right of any individual member of the public is being attenuated by denying them that right. A press member may be here to vindicate that right, but they still need to be here. And our defendants have a right in the Sixth Amendment. And closing the court abridges his rights in this trial. And the judge says, all right, listen, I'm still going to seal this court, and I'm going to tell you the reasons why I'm sealing this court, but the reasons are also going to be under seal. Well, that defeats the purpose, Judge, says the defense. Without going into the details, I think the public has a right to know why it's being excluded from the courtroom and have factual findings. Not only are they excluding us, but they're not telling us why they're excluding us. It's double lack of transparency. We want to know what the basis is. If the basis is to protect sources and methods or whatever the FBI makes up, why can't they tell us that? Kelly says, well, the problem with this case is there's no way for me to do that. Okay, I can reach appropriate legal standards publicly, but there's no way for me to do anything more without defeating the very purpose of going under seal. All the defense attorneys are upset about this. Jaraguay, Tario joins. Okay, so this is something that's big. This is something that's very important. All the defendants want this out. The prosecutor, of course, sides with Kelly. He says, well, Judge, hold on. It would be appropriate to keep the court closed for fear of harming the integrity of the case. That's the point. That's the entire job of the defense, is to shatter the integrity of your case because your case has no integrity. If it had a bunch of integrity, then you wouldn't be worried about the harm. What's the worry? What's the fear of harming the integrity of your case? Parson says, Your Honor, there was already a sealed hearing yesterday for 3 hours, and you didn't put that in the docket either. So the judge is not even putting the sealed hearings in the record. We can't even follow along. So they're not telling us that they're sealing hearings or the reason for the sealed hearings, and they're still doing the sealed hearings. You said that you would provide a written order under seal laying out your specific findings, Judge. If you could just ensure that is placed on the docket with some indication, if you can, the length of time that you think we should be sealed. And Judge Kelly, he says, gosh, I know you want to know about this case, but gosh, part of the reason why this is so difficult to judge is because, as you indicate, my ruling here is for a moment in time, and it may well be down the line that there's a basis to unseal some of all of this or prior proceedings. So I understand your motion, and I think there is some relief I can grant you, and I will do it. And I don't know what that is. But then he goes to clear the courtroom. Defense attorney Metcalf says, I have a witness I've had here all morning. Is there any way that we can... Well, why don't we discuss that when we get back and the rest of your game plan? They take a 10-minute break. Brandy says, well, I'm going to step away from the court for a few minutes so that it'll reopen, which is a good thing. Sometimes this happens, when you go to a restaurant, food takes forever. You get up, go to the restroom, come back, food's there. It's like magic. She tried to see if that would happen in court. Let's see what happened. It didn't work. Oh, bummer. So the Justice Department is here. Things are still under seal. Signs of life, we're back. Court is back open. Kelly's back on the bench. We have a witness. Stephen Metcalf is at the podium, runs a comb through his hair at the counsel's table, takes a sip of water. We're ready. Takes to the podium. The defense calls Lisa McGee to the stand. She is wearing a blonde and white polka dot dress, glasses, long blonde hair, pulled back in a neat ponytail. Soft voice. Defense says, sorry I had you waiting all day here, Lisa. Can you tell me about yourself? Yeah, I'm 40 years old. 2 daughters with Pizzola. Who's the defendant? How old are your daughters? 18 and 22 years old. Both going to school. One's attending trade. One's getting her master's. And how long have you been with Pizzola? says, we've been together for a little over 22 years. Wow. Now, what were you doing when you were introduced to Dominic? She says, I was a waitress. We hit it off. We had a date. I saw him at the restaurant a couple times, said hi, here and there. I had this thing where I wouldn't date customers, but since I was introduced to him outside the environment, I got to know him a bit better and gave him a shot. I was 18 at the time. He was 23. She learned that he was a single father, wanted custody. She says he was in the Marine Corps, avid boxer throughout high school, won awards for boxing at school. I want to show you a pic of this guy. Is this Dominic? She says, yeah, it's Pizzola from his boxing days. There's a woman in that picture. Who's that? Oh, that's Gloria Peak. That's the first African-American lesbian boxing coach who went on to coach people in the Olympics. And he says to McGee, Lisa, well, what did Dominic think of her? And so you see, he says, oh, Pizzola highly respected her. Her wisdom, her coaching, her training, her guidance in life. And this is a nice, way to ingratiate Dominic Pizzola with the lesbian African-American boxing coach community. And so if there is any jurors on there who fit any of those categories, for example, if there are jurors who happen to be African-American or lesbian or boxing coaches or people who went to the Olympics, they're going to think, oh, Dominic Pizzola likes those people in those categories, And so rather than having these Proud Boys created to be these caricatures of white supremacy and bigotry, no, he likes African-American lesbian boxing coaches who went to the Olympics, by the way. So Pizzola is leaned back in his chair a little bit, watching his wife intently as she testifies. Stressful, man. Now there's another picture. He's been in custody this whole time. There's another picture now from the right. He graduated. Was pursuing his Golden Glove. Maggie was working to be an apprentice for an electrician. Said he had very large hands. So it's tough for him to fit his fingers into tight electrical spaces. It was dangerous. So Pizzola went to work for his father, opened a flooring company, ran a crew himself. There's another picture of Pizzola with his dog. They asked Pizzola's wife, Lisa, oh, tell us about your dog. Oh, that's Mason. He's cuddling with him while he sits in an armchair. That's Dominic's boy, says Lisa. Here's another pic of another dog. Who's this? This is Osiris. He died of cancer. Now, when you guys moved in together, tell me about Pizzola fighting for custody. Yeah, he raised her. She says she's our daughter now. And what did Pizzola do? He worked all the time, 80 hours a week. Days he wouldn't get home until 3 or 4 a.m. So he could finish a job and start another. And what happened when COVID hit? Oh, extraordinarily difficult, says Lisa. He stopped working during the height of the pandemic. He did contract work at hospitals and schools. Because of the lockdowns, he was unable to get work regularly. And there was a BLM protest that turned violent in Rochester. She was working at the courthouse downtown at the time, was sent home early because of the protest. There were other things going on in Rochester at the time. Diners, Ox and Stone. Protests were taking place about 1,000 feet from where she was working. I got a phone call that there was violence turning on. And there were personal vehicles set on fire, and there was a construction trailer that was tied to a company that Pizzola was working for. But because of the riots, that work was shut down. When Lisa was working at the courthouse, she was a supervisor of pretrial release. So she would go to jail early, run background checks, collect information. Apparently, there was an incident from the Pizzola household, 6 or 7 miles from their house. Dominic was aware of this. And something happened. They sent us home early. Now, due to all of these changes, due to attacks on your city, due to COVID lockdowns, due to economic insecurity, were there any changes in Dominic? She says, yeah. She sighs. Yeah. He always went to the gym. He always went to work. He was an active person. He started drinking very heavily, and he'd inundate himself with Fox News day and night. Before COVID, was he into politics? No, barely. He became consumed around this time. I told him to find some friends and a hobby. But is that why he's sitting here today? She says, yeah, it is. Because the wife told him to find some friends and get a hobby. He joined the Proud Boys. She started the whole thing. Maybe if Lisa didn't tell Dominic to find some friends and find a hobby, there would be no January 6th. Shout out to all the loving wives out there. We have another one. This continues. It was around this time, end of November, that Lisa says she found out that he applied to the Proud Boys. Did you find out what he did in November? Well, look who's back. I believe he ran into a guy named Dick Sweats, who's back in the house. Sweets or sweats? Sweets or sweats? Okay, so the defense lawyer says, I got to be clear here. You're telling me that Pizzola ran into a Proud Boy named Dick Sweats? Defense lawyer says, wait a minute. Sweets? Like Dick Sweets or Dick Sweats? Sweats. Did he go by another name? No, not that I know of, but I also thought his name was ridiculous. Yeah, so do we. Yeah, so do we. Yeah. Okay. No other names. All right, there you go. So Lisa says at this time, Pizzola told her a little bit about the Proud Boys. You know, they'd protect people, stop rioters, get in contact with them. So he ended up joining. And he went to DC on the 12th, right? Yeah, by that time he had become a Proud Boy. He was photographed. Washington Post had him on the front page. Washington Post put him on the front page. What'd you say to him? Lisa says, I called him an effing idiot. I said, you're an effing idiot for being on the front page. She says that the trip Pizzola took to the Jeremy Bertino event was not, not to deliver a shield for nefarious purposes. She said, my father came by our house on January 5th and told Dominic, hey, don't go to DC, buddy. You got a wife and 2 kids, all right? Don't go over there. Father-in-law knows best. Defense says, well, what did Pizzola say when his father-in-law warned him? He says, you're right. I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to go. So then January 6th comes. Defense says, are you at home? She says, no. Where'd you go? I went out with my friends. We had a girls' night out and then went to the casino. And that's when Dominic left to go to DC. She said, up until I decided to have a girls' night out, he planned to stay home. But then when I left, he decided to go. So she went out for a girls' night. So he went to DC, caused the insurrection. Would you lie for him? No. Why not? Well, I don't see a reason to lie for him. Now, I want to ask you about his commitment to the Marines and to his job and his children. Is it true that Pizzola... Wait a minute. Is this McCullough? Okay, that's Metcalf. I think we're into cross now. It says, Pizzola's oath didn't end when he left the Marines, right? Yeah, I believe that's true for all service members. And as you said, when he got into 2020, he was paying more attention to politics. True? Yeah. And you saw him increasingly focused on the battle of this good versus evil, right? Objection, overruled. He became increasingly focused on politics. You understood him to be increasingly focused on the split becoming apparent in the country. Is that true? Yeah. And he viewed the country as falling into 2 different sides, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know in terms of whether he saw it, as you put it, good and evil, just that there was a divide. Did he believe the country was on the brink of civil war? Did he tell that with you? She says, I don't really recall. Now, you said that Pizzola became increasingly committed to the Proud Boys, that he took 7 trips, and that he took a trip to the Carolinas to deliver a shield to Jeremy Bertino, right? Yeah. Now, I want to put up this photo of this shield. black and yellow on the screen. Have you seen it? That shield? No, I haven't seen it. It's kind of an art project. Yeah. And Dominic drove from Rochester to North Carolina. Yeah. And the purpose was not to just deliver the shield, but also to get out of New York and have a little fun vacation. She says, yeah. It's my understanding the person was supposed to deliver the shield got COVID. Oh, okay. And so Pizzola stepped up. Yeah. And that's what he does, right? He steps up when he's called on. And she says, yeah, depending. Yeah. So he went to DC. He took a trip from North Carolina. That's over 600 miles for a vacation to get away from COVID policies in New York. Is that what you're saying? She says, yeah. Do you know whether those policies are more lax in different areas? She says, I don't know what the policies are. Did you feel unrest in Rochester? She said, yeah, the only way to go out to dinner at that time was to eat outside. Our country was insane. Under the total control of a bunch of medical maniacs. She said the protest angers her. They petrified me. They made me fearful. And Dominic was there to protect you, right? Yeah, I would say so. And so when you're scared or angry, you'll assume he'll be able to protect you. She said, well, I would assume so, but that's not always the case. Now, when we searched your home with a warrant and raided everything, there was a notebook that we recovered in your house that we rummaged through along with everything else. He brings up this spiral-bound notebook up at the witness stand. You recognize this notebook? Yeah, this was the notebook Dominic used when he was taking a college math course. This is what prosecutors do. Everything in your house is fair game. My daughter could really use this right now. She's struggling. Great line. Great line. Outstanding shout out to Lisa. Just so we're clear what happened here. This prosecutor, because these prosecutors and FBI agents, they raid everything. They take everything. And they rummage through it like little just cretins. Oh, what's in here? What's in here? Disgusting. And so you can just imagine. Imagine if somebody came into your home and did this. Went through all of your notebooks, everything, and dragged this one out. What is this notebook? Like this smug prosecutor. And so she comes out and she says, oh, yeah, that's the notebook Dominic used when he was taking college math. My daughter could really use that right now. She's struggling. Can I have that back? He says, yeah. Making them eat that, right? The fact they took it. Ask, oh, yeah. Okay, why don't you turn to the yellow tab inside the book? You recognize his handwriting? Yeah, it's Dominic's. Well, I want to turn your page over there. You recognize that handwriting? She looks at the page. Yeah, that's my handwriting. I want to turn you back over to another page. It's her handwriting again. Now let's look at the pages in between them. She says, well, I saw this, but I never read it. On the first page of the notebook, Pizzola describes why he wants to become a Proud Boy. She says, I'm reading. Give me a minute. Reading it. Okay. Did he say he would fight until his last breath to make sure his children don't inherit in a communist country? Objection. Hearsay. Overruled. Judge lets it in. Well, that's what it says here. He wrote it ultimately that if we are, so they're reading this guy's journal now, essentially, right? He's writing some notes. They're reading his journal in open court. So just remember, this is what they do, right? When you're taking your journal notes and all your stuff, right? They raid everything. I'm not saying you're going to be committing crimes or be raided by the FBI, but just be, they have no shame. They'll go through everything. He wrote, ultimately, if we're not in a civil war, I'd like to open a dog sanctuary. You see that? Maggie's reading. She says, I see where he says that. Pizzola continues to write in the book that he truly believes this is a battle between capitalism and communism, freedom versus tyranny. Did Pizzola ever share with you his views that the country was on the brink of civil war? I don't recall him ever saying that to me, no. Did he ever describe the concept of a country falling into a battle of good versus evil or freedom versus tyranny? Is this illegal? Can you not say that? We say that like 3 times a show. Sheesh. Waiting for the feds to come crashing through the windows. No, not to me. So when Pizzola left to go to DC on 1/5, you didn't know what was in his head. No, I had no idea. I don't possess the power of telepathy, prosecutor, so no. So just knew that he was going to DC with the Proud Boys? Yeah, I knew he was going to DC. I assumed it was with the Proud Boys. And you were frustrated with his relationship with the Proud Boys, weren't you? Well, I was frustrated with the amount of drinking he was doing. He went from drinking a couple beers to entire bottles of bourbon. He had changed. When he came back from D.C., were you frustrated with him? Objection, out of scope, going way past the timeline, way outside direct. Overruled. Can you repeat the question? Withdraws the question. Now, he returned from D.C. and he didn't stay for long. He was there through Friday, January 8th, but left the following day on the 9th. And you were able to get in touch with him? Objection sustained. Another objection sustained. Metcalf is back up on redirect. Says, sorry, I have asked to get before I get you out of here. When Dom went to North Carolina, did he drive? Yeah, I think so. You sure it wasn't other individuals who did the driving? No, I don't know. Was it his home? Was his truck gone? No, it was home. So he had no other vehicle, right? Yeah. So someone had to pick him up for that trip then, right? Yeah. Did you later learn about other stops? Who was the other individual with him? Was it Ronnie? I think it was somebody named Casper. Did you come to find out that Casper had a bunch of different people and family they made stops at? Yeah. How many of those stops did you know about? I don't recall. I think there were several. So here you see they're trying to say he didn't drive 600 miles for, an insurrection planning meeting. They made a bunch of stops. It was a road trip. Now, Brandy continues, there are stipulations that are being made to the jury. We've got new stipulations. Defendants and prosecutors agree to new stipulations. We'll go through them when the documents are posted. Here are a few. Traveled to D.C. with Matt Green. After the barricade breach, 3 men joined the demonstrators at the Peace Circle. These 2 had no contact with the defendants. And there we go. With that, Judge Kelly ends the trial day for the jury and dismisses them. Jurors are gone now. Defense approaches, argues for expert testimony. Metcalf says, I should be able to elicit expert testimony about police formation and police tactics. All these riot police everywhere. What were they doing? Judge says, well, what's your argument? Is it that Pizzola did not intend to rob anyone because it was self-defense? He says, no, it was in defense of others. No, says Metcalf. Says there are certain different times when people erupt. Ryan Samsel's getting aggressive. Judge says, but Ryan Samsel episode is outside the very tightly constrained boundaries of time and place that you're talking about. But Metcalf says, no, Judge, not until you see what the video shows. He says, whatever evidence you want this witness to talk about, the facts are in evidence either way. So this expert testimony, the judge says, I guess my question is, what would they witness? What would this witness testify to that would negate the elements of the defense that would not be self-defense or defense of others? He says, I understand the theory. Okay, Pizzola grabbed the shield and how that could, in theory, provide self-defense. He grabbed the shield because he didn't want to be hit or someone else. But the problem is, again, and we litigated this already. I already ruled on it a long time ago. It seems that this way, quite a long time ago. But my point is, what's different now? How could this be a defense or negate the elements of the crime? Even if you can't articulate some very dancing on the head of a pin answer, it certainly feels like the effect of a juror hearing this evidence would be an invitation to a defense that I've excluded. And the defense chimes back in. This is confusion. It mitigates the intent. Chaos mitigates intent. It's madness. There is no intent. When Pizzola falls, people fall. There's a lengthy back and forth. Judge Kelly doesn't seem convinced. Metcalf is very animated, very loud. Kelly asks him twice, lower your voice. We're right here, he says. We're all here. He says, you're speaking to the judge, not the jury. I don't need all the showmanship. Just take it easy. He's still really pushing. Kelly's not buying it. He says, how does agitating the crowd negate the theory that he committed the robbery? He says it shows the police deviated from a policy in an instant and it created the storm of chaos. People are laying on top of you. There's a shield on top of you. Officers are using a different force in conflicting ways. But the judge says, well, so what? Why is it relevant how people fell on him? I'm having trouble how it negates his intent regarding the riot shield. Defense says one thing a jury won't be able to consider unless this witness is on the stand is something called a rescue circle. The rescue circle, for example, provides context as to why officers were the way they were and why they started using repellents. And Metcalf, his tone is borderline shrill, she says, exclaims, "You gotta grant me something here, Judge, something." Judge tells the defense, you've got to explain something. You got to explain he got the shields and how it's not that he wanted to defend himself. How does this expert witness explain a defense that's not self-defense? Kelly's not convinced. I understand negating the robbery charge is downstream important of intent, but how does this expert testimony negate the robbery? He says the police created a more dangerous environment than what existed. Circumstances around the robbery happened so fast, every fact matters. I can't explain what a rescue circle is without an expert. And he says Mark O'Day was in or behind a botched raid circle, and it diverged with people around Pizzola. The jury should be able to hear that, make a decision as to the use of force and the intention at the time. One causal link leads to another. He says, but they still need to explain that it was a rescue circle. And even if I bought that, what is really outside the most clear outside bounds is a deviation from policy. Says if the police caused this in some way, they caused it. Why does it matter if it's a deviation of policy? Because it stirred up and created the entire situation. Kelly says, nope. Pattis passes a note to Metcalf at the podium while he's talking. Kelly says, the judge, okay, so it was chaos. And as a result, he wasn't trying to rob? So just explain. I'm sorry, I don't understand your argument, I confess. I'm going to hear from the government. If you want to submit something tonight, submit something. I'll take a look at it. I'll look at the motion. The defense says, I'll give you 5 examples. Police formation, leadership setup, leadership tactics, commands to officers, deviating from the crowd's reaction. And they're continuing to argue about this. Prosecutor weighs in, and outside of a deviation from the policy, nothing was in the notes, says the prosecutor. It's insufficient. And then Brandy's tweet thread drops off right there. Let's see if there was another follow-up to this. And here's where we pick it up. Metcalf says, if you deny my expert, I'm going to put somebody else on the stand. I'd say this. Evidence is going to bleed over past tomorrow. There's 2 more evidentiary hearings that we're going to have issues on. Hernandez is asking how much time we're going to be spending on the sealed portion. Kelly says draft instructions for Biggs. They're all talking about scheduling stuff. Next Friday, are we sitting on the 14th on Valentine's Day? I've got to take my wife out or she'll kill me, says the prosecutor. Plan at least oh wait, that's not on the 14th. It's a Friday. Yeah. In district court, she's committed to this day. Defendants are on, talking about closing arguments scheduled, and that ends it for the day. And so we will leave it right there. Proud Boys trial, day 51, comes to a close. Back tomorrow, 9 a.m., and we'll see what witnesses we have in store.